Um, my name, Carol, I was named after my great-grandfather, whose name was Charles. And in the Jewish religion, you name after you take the first letter. So my name was Carol. And then my middle name is Jean, and I was named after friends of my parents. His name was Eugene, and he died very young from tuberculosis. And so my name was Carol Jean. My maiden name was Schuster. And that's about the history of my name. That's as much as I know.
You didn't have a nickname?
No nickname. It was always Carol.
And Carol, your present family situation is what?
Okay. I am married to a former Brentwood teacher, Joe Basso. This is his 10th year in retirement. So right now it's just the two of us at home. We have a daughter, Jill, who actually lives in Baltimore right now. She's 25. She lives and works in Baltimore. I have 3 stepchildren, a daughter who lives in Manhattan, and then I have a stepson in Virginia and another one in New Hampshire. And the 2 boys each have 2 children, so I have 4 grandchildren, 2 girls and 2 boys. And they're all around the same age. The 2 girls were born in 92, and the 2 boys were born in 94.
Why don't we name all of your children?
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, my grandchildren first are Emily and Zachary, and their dad is Phil. Their mom is also Carol, and they live in Virginia. And then my other 2 grandchildren are Amanda and Joe, and their parents are Joe and Suzanne. And then my stepdaughter Diana lives in Manhattan, and then our daughter Jill. And those are all the children.
And the usual question would be, and how did you meet your husband? But you've already told.
Yes, my husband was actually my math teacher when I was in 9th grade. That was originally how we met. And at the time, we had a very special relationship. I loved math at the time. And everybody always has that favorite teacher. And he was my favorite teacher. And we had a very, very special, in fact, I babysat for my stepchildren at the time. And I would come back to visit. And whenever I needed a reference for something or anything, it would be like Joe that I would come to fill out recommendations for me. And then I started teaching after 4 years away at college. And we became very, very good friends and colleagues. And 4 years after I started teaching, we started dating, and then we got married.
So there's a lot of years in between there.
Yes, there was 11 years from the time we first met until we actually started dating. And I love numbers, and I'd always play around with the idea that he's 11 years older than I am. And I was 14 when I met him, and he was 25. And then 11 years later, when we got married, when we started dating, actually, I was 25. So it was just the 11s, 14s, and 25s. So like numbers that I liked. I play those in the lottery.
You both bring an awful lot to this union in the way of talents and skills, particularly in the math area. But what about the kids now? Do they share some of your interests, their parents' interests?
They're all excellent, excellent math students. My husband's youngest son now went back to become a teacher. And he will be teaching, probably, he's hoping to teach 6th grade with a concentration in mathematics. My daughter eventually would like to teach, but not math. She was always a good math student, but I think because both parents were math teachers, and we used to talk numbers a lot, she would say, so she doesn't like math. But everybody definitely has a talent for math.
Are you also game players or card players?
Yes, big card players, big game, especially Joe. Yeah, love playing cards. And I love do all these strange things with numbers. All of them always.
Is there a lot of family contact, Carol?
Family contact as far as extended family?
Do you get, the children and the grandchildren, do you get to see them very often?
Not as much as we would like because everybody's so far away. Mm-hmm. But yes, we stay in contact. In fact, this weekend we're going up to New Hampshire to visit the 2 New Hampshire grandchildren. It's early October to see the changing of the leaves. And the 2 from Virginia spent a week with us this summer. And then we'll be down there to see them.
You mentioned that you were born in Queens.
Yes.
And talk a little bit about those early years.
Yeah, I don't have too many memories. I was 4 when we moved from Queens to Brentwood. But I have a few memories dating back to my first memory. I was 18 months old. And I remember sitting in a store in a stroller, and there was a balloon tied to my carriage, and the balloon broke. And that's my first memory. And at the time, later on, I asked my mother. I told her what I remembered, and she's the one who told me I was 18 months. But
I remember if it frightened you.
I remember. Yeah, I remember crying. I remember, and my next memory was I was 2.5, and I actually remember Hanukkah when I was 2.5. I remember getting a present from my grandparents, and I remember my 4-year-old birthday party. And then I have a lot of memories once we moved out here. I was 4.5 when we moved. It was actually Bayshore was the mailing address, but it was Brentwood Schools.
Now, when were you born?
I was born in 1949 in June, and we moved to Brentwood.
Right after the war.
Yes, I'm definitely a baby boomer.
Now, talk about Brentwood when you moved here, when you moved out. What you remember of that?
When we moved, I wasn't yet in school, but my brother was in 2nd grade, and there was the only school was the village school. And at the time that we moved, it was the beginning of Brentwood really growing, and there was no room for them to have a class in the village school. And he finished 2nd grade in the basement of the firehouse, is where they held 2nd grade for him. And we were a new development, and one of our neighbor's daughters was in high school, and there was no high school in Brentwood at the time, and she went to Bayshore to go to high school. And the first graduating class that I'm aware of graduated at Brentwood in 1957. I started kindergarten in September of 54, and that was the year that Southwest Elementary School opened up and Southeast Elementary School. And so I was the first class at Southwest. And then when I was in 4th grade, so probably, 1956, 57, South Elementary School was built, which later became Maslow Tavalo School, which is now gone. And that was on Paradise Lane. And it was named at the time that we started school there. But the school wasn't ready in September. So we did split session for at least a month at Southeast Elementary School. We went in, I don't remember if we went in the morning or the afternoon, and then we went to South. I know South Junior High opened in 57, I think. My brother was the first class to go to South. And then that's the only school that I went to that wasn't brand new. And the year that I started 7th grade, North Junior High opened. And then when I was in 9th grade, West Junior High opened. And I can't even tell you when all the elementary schools were built. And then I began Sandling in September of 64, and that was brand new at the time. So I went to 3 brand new schools going through Brentwood. It just kept growing in leaps and bounds at the time that I went through.
Remember Brentwood as a wide open space?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember going down 5th Avenue, and there was nothing on 5th Avenue. It was like farmland going down 5th Avenue. And the Southern State Parkway stopped at exit 41, which was new at that time. I don't even know when it went that far. I think the expressway went to Huntington. I'm not even sure.
And most of the shopping was done in Bayshore.
The shopping was down in Main Street in Bayshore, which was beautiful at the time. It was downtown Bayshore was the place to go. And the mall was built, the South Shore Mall was built in like the mid 60s, I think, or the early 60s. And that's when Bayshore started to, I don't even know what word I'm looking for, but
was there a Grant shopping center?
There was Grant's, and there was Bohack's, I remember. And that was where, and then there was...
was Kohler's Market still there at the time?
Kohler's Market?
Kohler's Market was up by the railroad station, the old railroad station.
The railroad station in Brentwood? Yeah, see, I don't remember that. What I do remember, though, is the old library. The library was a very small building on, I don't think it was 3rd Avenue. I think it was 4th Avenue, across the street from the old administration building. And I remember going to the library all the time. And I
didn't ask you this before, but what was your mom's maiden name?
Block.
Do you know anything about her family history or your father's family history? If you do, give us some picture of
my mom, both of her parents were from Russia. Both of her parents came from very large families that they came over to the United States in the early 1900s. And then my mother was an only child. She grew up in New York City. Then they moved to the Bronx, and where she was a teenager.
Part of Russia, her family?
Lithuania. And they all came over again during all the pogroms and everything in Russia when her family.
There used to be a community in Brentwood. I don't know if it was when you moved here. There was a little Russian community or Ukrainian community.
I remember going through junior high with people from Latvia, and that was at the time when that was part of the Soviet Union, and they were a very, very tight group then. That's what I remember. But when my grandparents came over, they wanted to assimilate, and my grandmother went to school, and so that she wouldn't have an accent. She did not want to be known as a greenhorn, she used to say, and they never had an accent, and they wanted to be Americans.
What did you learn? What was the most important thing you learned from your grandmother?
It's so funny because it was just a saying that she used to have, and she would say it in Russian all the time, and it just meant the slower you go, the faster you get there. That's what I remember from my grandmother. And yes.
What about your dad's family?
Now, my dad, both of his parents came from Austria, but my father never knew his father. My father's father died while my grandmother was pregnant with him, and then she died when he was 13. So he lived with his grandparents in the Bronx. And my parents, actually, they lived in the same building in the Bronx. And my mother lived on the 5th floor, and my father lived on the 1st floor. And I'm sorry, the other way around. And they met in the elevator in the Bronx. And then their first home together, they lived with my grandparents for a while. My father was in World War II. And then they got married while he was serving in World War II. And then their first home together, they moved to an apartment in Queens, and then they came out here.
They lived in Glen Oaks.
Glen Oaks, Queens. And then they came out to Basso, which everybody in the family thought they were moving to the end of the world. It was so far away to people at the time. And in fact, my grandparents moved to Elmont, which is really right over the border. And people wouldn't even come to Elmont. It was like they had moved so far. And then when my parents moved to Basso.
Have you ever had a thought of visiting your grandparents or the family hometowns, either in Russia or in Austria?
No. Yeah, I never did. And actually, my father didn't know that much about his family. And my mom passed away back in 1993. And at the time, my father spent some time looking back into his roots, especially because he had been an orphan. So I think he knows some more of the history now than I knew growing up.
What's the earliest memory you have of your father?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. The earliest memory of my father. I don't know. There's so many. I can't pick out the earliest.
Just name a memory.
Oh, I can name a memory when I was 10, because this was, my father used to faint when anything would happen to me. That was a big thing. And the first time that he fainted was when he found out that my mother gave birth to a little girl. So this became the big joke in the family, that he fainted when he had a daughter. And then the first time that I was aware of his fainting was I was 10 years old, and I needed a little surgery on my toe. And the doctor, at the time, doctors were different then. Doctors used to make house calls, and doctors knew everybody very well. And the doctor told my mother not to come because she was the nervous type. And so my father brought me. And as soon as the doctor gave me an injection, my father went right out. So that was the first time that he fainted that I remembered. And then I broke my foot, and they were setting my foot, and they told my father that he could stay in the room. And he said, no, I can't. And he went right out. And that's my memory with my father. He fainted many times. He went with me after I started teaching, and I saved my money, and I bought my first car. My father was very excited, very emotional, and he fainted. So that was always the big joke in the family.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have two brothers. They're both also Brentwood graduates. My older brother graduated in '64.
And what's his name?
Gary Schuster.
Okay.
And he is now the Dean of Science at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia. He's very famous in his field. He's an organic chemist. My younger brother, Stephen Schuster, graduated in '74, and he lives here on Long Island. And then I have...
what is he doing today?
He has his own business where he sells medical equipment.
Oh. Okay. The things that we learn from our brothers and sisters sometimes fall through the net as we get older, we forget. But if you reflect on the impact that growing up with your brothers has had on you, what did you learn from them?
Well, one of the things I'll say about my older brother, when he was like a genius growing up. And one of the funny stories in the family is that I was very sick as a baby, but what it turned out was I had a milk allergy, and they didn't know that that's what it was at that time. So there was a period of time, my brother was 3, and the way the story goes in the family is that the doctor used to come every day to check on me, but then would be fascinated by my brother because at 3 he was like splicing wires and taking radios apart and things like that. And then, so in growing up, and then he was just a regular kid growing up, but I always would say that how he like outdid everything that I did. Like when I graduated high school, he got engaged. When I got my bachelor's degree, he got his doctorate. So that was always the big joke. But I would just joke around about it. I was always very proud of him.
But it wasn't an intentional competition. It was just this.
Right. That's just who it was. So one time I used to smoke at the time. Right. And this to me typified our relationship.
Okay.
I used to smoke, and I had this little revolver that was a lighter that my friend had given me. And I thought it was very cute, and I showed it to my brother. And without doing it on purpose or anything, because it was just who we were and what our relationship was. He says, oh, yeah. And he took out this big cannon that was a lighter. And I said, now that typifies our relationship. And that's my favorite story of my brother. And then my younger brother, who's actually 7 years younger than I am, I was very protective of him growing up. And the fact that he lives on Long Island, we are actually now closer than I am with my older brother who lives in Atlanta. So,
okay.
And
were there other adults besides your grandparents and your mother and father that had a very important influence on your early growing up and development?
Not really, because of the fact that both of my parents were only children. They were the main adults in my life, were my parents.
When did you know, Carol, that you were going to become a teacher? At what point did you, and I think I know who had the influence on you there.
Actually,
Joe must have had some
well,
influence.
Actually, I don't remember ever not wanting to be a teacher. And from the day I entered first grade, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. And, you know what you know. So going through elementary school, I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. But then I probably was in 9th grade, the year that Joe was my teacher, when I decided to be a math teacher. I love math. And that's what I saw myself doing. And I stayed with that till actually when I entered college, I also thought about either I wanted to major in math and be a math teacher, or I thought about going into psychology for a little while and becoming a counselor. But it pretty much, and then I went back to the math.
Is there something you could point to if, when I ask this question, what's the toughest decision you've ever had to make? Is there something that comes to mind?
The toughest decision. I don't know. Nothing really. It's just funny that now, because just in talking about how I wanted to be maybe major in psychology. And again, a funny story was I was debating whether to major in math or to major in psychology in college. And the day that I first had to declare a major and I knew you could change it, it was a heavy rain outside. And the math department was right there, and the psychology department was a few blocks away. And so I decided to be a math major. And I often say, I wonder what happens if it wasn't raining that day, if my life would have taken a different course. But that is actually, so that was a pretty major decision. And I'm trying to, I can't really, everything just kind of falls into place, a big decision is a decision to retire or not. And to me, it was, I retired the year I was eligible. And a big part of that was because Joe and I are 11 years apart. He'd been retired for 9 years. And so a big part of it was to be home with him. And I've done it for 33 years. And so I decided the year I was eligible to do that. And now actually a decision is, what to do next. So let's see.
That's the fun part. We'll get to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
We talked a little bit earlier about games and that Joe likes to play cards especially. But do you remember a favorite game that you played as a child, an indoor game, let's say?
I used to love playing the game of life, Clue, and cards, 500 Rummy. I I had my closest friends in growing up were all game players, and we used to spend a lot of time playing games.
What kind of
Outdoor game, growing up on Long Island Shore, we used to play hide and seek, red light, green light, ring Alivio, King of the Mountain, whatever it was. I used to just so happen that the development where we lived on our block was all boys. So not that I was ever a tomboy, but I used to play with the boys. And till I actually went to kindergarten and met a few people, a few girls nearby. But my block was all boys.
You've gotten a lot of gifts in your life. Tell us about one gift that you're thinking of right now that I said this was an important gift that you once got.
Okay, first thing that came to my mind is a gift that my daughter gave me this past Christmas was a brownie pin. And the reason why it was so significant is when I was young, I was very shy. And when I was in first grade, I was in the brownies, and I loved the brownies. And I lost my pin, my brownie pin. And rather than tell anybody that I lost my pin, because I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't want anybody to yell at me that I lost my brownie pin. I told my mother that I didn't like the brownies, and I stopped going to the brownies. And then as you get older and you look back and you say, what a silly thing. And, how sad that I gave up something I enjoyed because I lost the pin. So this past Christmas, my daughter gave me a brownie pin, and I was very touched by that.
Do you remember your first paying job?
My first paying job? Yes, I worked for John's Bargain Store in town of Bayshore, Main Street in Bayshore. Oh, except for babysitting before that, but my first paying job was working for John's Bargain Store.
What was the big family holiday that you guys celebrated?
The big family holiday? Probably Passover. We weren't a religious family, but it was nice for a lot of tradition. We would always be with the same people and had a lot of family tradition. Holidays to us meant having dinner.
What about after-school interests?
As a child? I was involved in a lot of clubs. I was involved in the yearbook and in student council, a lot of clubs in school. So I remember after-school interests being that. I was never a sports person at all. And then just, like being with friends. One of my favorite activities from the time I was very young was reading. I love to read. So I remember that.
Enjoy reading?
Yes, very much. Very much.
The nature of the toys that we enjoy changes over the years. Do you remember some of the toys, or at least one toy that you had that was a favorite growing up?
A favorite toy?
Okay.
No. I remember some dolls. I remember playing with dolls, just dolls. And as I said, games. I remember playing a lot of games.
What about favorite season of the year?
Summer. Absolutely.
Has it changed?
Not at all. Always been summer.
Okay. What about an aroma that when you get a whiff of it, it takes you back to a
honeysuckle.
And what does that remind you of?
Childhood, my house in Bayshore.
Okay.
That the house was in the family. My dad sold it in 1998, so they moved in 1954, and he was there till 1998. So it was a long time that the house was in the family.
Yeah, it's a wonderful aroma. It sure can magic. It can bring back. Now, you've kind of told us what the schools were that you've attended. Why don't you take us all the way through graduate school? Take us from
kindergarten through? Okay. Well, I started kindergarten at Southwest Elementary School. It was a half a day. And then I did first, second, and third grade at Southwest. And then I did fourth, fifth, and sixth at South Elementary School. And then junior high was South Junior High at the time. And actually, I was supposed to go to West Junior High when I was in ninth grade. And I went there for a couple of weeks. But I had been in the honors math in eighth grade, taking ninth grade math in eighth grade. And when I went to West, they didn't have it there. So it took a while, but I transferred actually to South. And I entered South 4 weeks after school started. And my first memory of that day is walking into Joe Basso's math class. He was teaching 11th grade math to ninth graders. And I walked into the room with my little sign-in sheet from guidance. And it was October 7th, 1963. And his very first words to me were, "What the hell are you doing here?" So that's become a joke because those were his first words to me. And again, at the time, I was very shy. And that was actually the year that I overcame my shyness. And a big part of it was making the switch from West Junior High to South, because I was always, I never wanted attention drawn to myself. But the fact that I did this I was only able to do it because I knew people in the South because I had been there. And so to prove to him not to worry, that night I went home and I learned everything they had done the first 4 weeks. And I came in, and that Friday we took a test, and I got 100 on the test, and that was the beginning of our relationship, was that year. And he, for me, was like just a great teacher. He was the kind of teacher that I, as a kid, needed. And
I'm almost afraid to ask this next question because obviously Joe has played such an important part in your life.
Yeah.
But were there any other great teachers that you encountered?
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Name one at any level.
Well, ninth grade actually was a very strong year for me. Bob Farina was my social studies teacher, if you knew Bob. And Gilda Manton was my English teacher. It was a great year for me. They were fantastic teachers. Those are names that stick out. And then up at the high school, because then I went to Sandling, and Claude Frank was my math teacher up there. That sticks out. And Mr. Werner, my 12th grade social studies teacher, and I can't think of his first name. I think it was Jack Werner.
Yes.
Yes, excellent teacher. And he was a great teacher for me. Those are the ones that stick out.
I'm glad I asked.
And then another interesting thing was Dave Martz was my chemistry teacher, and I also had Mike Welsh as a chemistry teacher. They team taught. And my second year teaching, I had Dave Martz's daughter in my class. And it was very interesting to have him sitting in the audience while I was up front as the teacher talking to the parents. And that's one of my early memories of teaching that sticks out, that I was, his daughter's teacher.
You have been blessed with some marvelous teachers in your life.
Yes. And yeah.
So continue.
All right. So then I went to the high school. I went to Sandling High School the year it opened. And in those days, it didn't matter where you lived. You were either pretty much you were in Sandling or you were in Ross. I know today it's like if you go to east or south, you go to Ross, and north or west, you go to Sandling. But when I went, it didn't matter where you lived. And most of my classes were in Sandling, and I had a few at Ross. And then I graduated in 1967 and went to Syracuse University. And to be perfectly honest, at the time, I was not planning on coming back to Brentwood. I wanted to move to Boston. I thought Boston was a great city to live in. And it was just at the beginning where it was tough for teachers to get jobs. And I applied to 27 school districts in Boston and didn't get any of the jobs. So then I applied to Long Island, and I actually, came back to Brentwood because then it was like, you go back where you came from, and I lived with my parents for a few months. And 33 years later, I retired.
When you finished your graduate degree, what degrees do you have now, or what certifications?
Oh, okay. So I went to Syracuse. My bachelor's was in, I had a dual major in math and secondary education. And then I got my master's degree at Stony Brook University. And then I went on, over the years of teaching, I went on and took in-service courses.
All that time, what's the proudest moment for you?
The proudest moment for me? As far as for myself, or proudest moment?
It could be a professional moment. It could be a personal moment. You can choose. There's a lot of moments.
I know. Some of these are tough to come up with, the proudest moment.
And believe me, whatever you say, you're going to say later on, I wish I had thought of it.
I know. It's very hard to pick the proud. I can't pick one proudest, but in my years of teaching, knowing, and I'm sure we all experience it, I know that I definitely had students who I had an effect on their life. And, and there's so many, I'm sure, that I did and I never knew it. But over the years, I've saved, letters that the students have written thanking me. And sometimes you get letters from students, you have no idea that you're having that effect on them. Or students who've come back to visit and they let you know, that you definitely influenced their life. And you have no idea that you're doing that. And those are moments that make me proud. After Joe and I got married, we team taught together. We did it 9 years. We started with a group of 7th graders. And we followed them through. We took his group and my group, and we followed them through for 3 years. We taught 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade math to the same students. And I happened to give birth to my daughter when our first group was in 9th grade. And I would say 50 kids came to the hospital to visit and to see the baby that they felt, because they had us for 3 years, and they felt that, they had a little sister. And so those are memories in teaching. And my first year teaching, I was given, as a first year teacher, I was given the honors math class, and they had a regents at the end of the year. And so my first year, I had 9 students get 100 on the regents. And, here I was, a kid, fresh out of college, really. And I wouldn't tell the kids. I'd never let anybody know it was my first year teaching at the time. And I remember feeling really good about that. So it's hard to pick one, but those are a few.
Well, I'm going to hit you with another hard question.
Okay.
Because you've got a lot of highs that we've been talking about, all these wonderful moments, but there had to be a worst day or a worst moment.
Not part of teaching, but teaching helped me, and that was when I lost my mom. That's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. She got sick in 1990, and she was sick for 3 years. She had cancer, and she was sick for 3 years. And at that point, I went from the classroom when South became a middle school. I became what was called the math lab consultant. It was a position that was created because since we had now 6th graders in the school, it was like, because 6th grade teachers are what they call general teachers, they wanted like a math specialist. And it was around that time when my mom got sick. And I remember being in the lab when I got a call that my dad actually needed me to come, and we brought her into the hospital, and then she died like about 5 days later. And coming back to work, I took a week off, and then coming back to work at that time was very, very hard. But yet, and I think anytime people go through a difficult time, working was also good, because during the school day, you would forget. And, and so being with the kids and hearing the kids' stories and working definitely helped get through it. And like anything else in life, time helps. But being at work made it, and being with kids, and you can't, because you have to be busy and you have to be with them. We always say time on task, and you can't let your personal life get in the way.
Carol, you told us that your family came to Brentwood in the mid-50s when you first moved here. But when you came back and took a job in Brentwood, I would like to ask you again, why did you come to work in Brentwood? You had been planning to go elsewhere.
I wanted to go to Boston, and there was I had no job there. It was actually April of my senior year in high school. I didn't know at the time. Now people, get jobs the week before school starts. And I was getting a little concerned, but that by April I didn't have an offer. And to my principal when I was at South Junior High School was Mike DeBellis. And Mike actually offered me a job, is what happened. He found out through a family friend who was also a principal in the district at the time that I was looking for a job. And Mike actually called and offered me the job while I was in Syracuse.
So this question doesn't apply as it would to other people. The first person you met when you came to the district, you've been in the district your whole...
Correct. I knew a lot of people. Yes.
A lot of people.
Yes. Yes.
Do you remember any questions that Mike asked you? Because it sounds like there wasn't even an interview, but if there was an interview, it was almost...
It was informal, because he knew me. He knew me because of the kind of student that I was.
Okay.
And actually what I remember Mike telling me, because as I said, to be perfectly honest, I wanted to go to Boston. And I remember talking to him on the phone. He said, I will give you the same kind of advice that I would give to my daughter. And his daughter actually was my age and started teaching in Brentwood the same year that I did. And he said, with the way times are now, because it was the very beginning of the time where it was hard to find a teaching job. And his advice was that for now, like to take the job. And I do remember also him calling me Mickey Math Teacher. And then I also remember when I came in to sign my contract, I wasn't even 22 years old yet. And I remember Mike talking to me about New York State retirement system and how that to me was the last thing in the world that I was thinking about. And it's just amazing to me that here I am retired from 33 years in Brentwood, that it really does. It goes so fast.
What did you make your first year in Brentwood?
$8,500. And then I got a raise the next year to $10,200. And I thought, oh my God, I'm making over $10,000 a year. And I brought home my first paycheck. I brought home $254.
Well, you've had an enormous immersion in Brentwood, and therefore I would ask you if you would care to say how Brentwood, in your opinion, is the same as other districts or different from other districts?
Well, one of the things, and I'm glad I thought of it now because to have gone through this whole thing and not to mention, I think one of the best things about Brentwood was all of the years that we got to work with Tony Felicio. I think that made Brentwood a wonderful, wonderful place for teachers to work. Through different in-service courses that I've taken, I've met, or different workshops that I've been at, I've met teachers in other districts. And the things that you hear that goes on in other districts, we never had that. I had a great career in Brentwood, working in a district that I felt was so pro-teacher. And I felt very lucky that things that I wanted to try, things that I wanted to do, because I did, even though I was in the same place, I did a lot of different things over the 33 years.
What, for example?
Well, I was teaching by myself. And then when we team taught was a very different thing. Nobody had done something like that. It was back in the 70s. Today, a lot of people do it. And it was like, the fact that we had the two teachers in the same classroom, and we had a lot of support with what we wanted to do. It was like we would come in. At the time, the way we wanted to track our students and what we wanted to teach them, it was like we were always encouraged. And
you had the freedom to do that.
Yes. And then, and again, meeting, teachers from other districts where they would worry about their contracts, and districts that almost had to go on strike. And, we didn't have that. The last time there was even any kind of problem with maybe where we wouldn't get a contract, I remember, was back in 1975. I remember right before school started, it was Labor Day night. We all had a meeting at Colony Hill to vote on the contract. And that was the last time that I remember that we ever had any doubt that we would have a contract.
Picketed outside the administration.
And picketed outside the administration building. And Les Black, I think, was president of the union that year that we picketed, or he was involved, or maybe he was a teacher. I'm not sure, but I remember Les Black being there when we picketed. And then
Guy was still superintendent.
Guy was superintendent. And when I was a student, he wasn't. Dr. Nanini was the superintendent. And then I believe that Guy was superintendent when I started, but I'm not sure. But I remember my early years was with Guy being superintendent.
If you were to describe, I was going to ask you later, but I want to ask you now. If you were to describe the students that we had in Brentwood, in a word, how would you describe the students?
There's no one word. Our student, I've seen a big change over the years. And we have very diverse students. We have very needy students. But what I found was, for so many years, I would say our good students, because people would always hear, oh, you work in Brentwood. Oh, my God, how can you work in Brentwood? And our students, I think, and especially listening to people in other districts, our students are very appreciative, I think, a lot of our students. I think one of our big problems always was very often getting parents to come up for the students for the more difficult students. But the parents that you did meet were parents that had a lot of respect for us, and I think in other districts, teachers aren't treated that way. Teachers are treated almost like, servants. You're expected to take care of their children. But many, many of the parents that I would meet would treat us with respect. Now, that's not to say that I met all the parents I needed to meet, because we do have a lot where we would, you make those phone calls and you can't get them, and the parents, would not come. And I think part of it is because the fact that it is a low socioeconomic area, that the parents, their priority was getting food on the table. And we've had some stories over the years where the kids, they get to you. I remember one time I had a student, he was a wonderful, wonderful student, and he wanted to talk to me privately. That he didn't do his homework the night before. And the reason he didn't do his homework was because their electricity was shut off. And the only power they had was emergency power. They had their refrigerator. And it just broke my heart, because this child, so many of the kids, came with stories like that. And we didn't even know all the stories they came with. And a lot of them, yes, it affected them. And, there were behavior problems, and they weren't going to do work, but there were so many students that rose above what they came with and just, really tried hard. And that day, I said to that student, there's a lot of things in life a lot more important than math. And those are things that you remember.
What about the teachers that you've worked with and known and still know? How would you describe them in a word?
These one words are tough, as you notice. I don't do well with one words. For the most part, dedicated would be the word I would use.
You had a job description, Carol, but you also had something that transcended that. You had a purpose for coming in every day and working with kids. How would you define your purpose for performing the job that you did for 33 years?
Well, my job changed. When I was in the classroom, it was
Did your purpose change too?
Yeah, well, it depends what you mean by purpose. Like, my purpose, I felt, when I was in the classroom, was to teach math and to get these students ready more for, at that, at the time, it was more, I felt much more, I wanted them to like math. And that was a big, I guess maybe that would be a purpose, was to, more so than to just get them ready for the regents or get them ready for tests or whatever. And now and then the job that I have now, I became so involved with all this state testing. And what I'm seeing is people now, it's like so much getting them ready for these tests. And I'm hoping that people don't lose the purpose of the joy of learning and the joy of...
You obviously enjoyed what you did.
Yeah, I have. This is what I say all the time. I have no regrets. No regrets. In fact, this is what I say. I'll say it here. I don't know. It was, I say I'm like the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Now, I remember Mary Tyler Moore Show was one of the first shows to go off the air when they were still high in the ratings. And I felt my last day in my room, I thought about the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And on the last episode, they sang "It's a Long Way to Tipperary." And as I closed my door, in my head, I said, there's not too many people in this world that can appreciate that. But in my head, I was saying, "It's a long way to Tipperary." And I have no regrets. I was ready to retire when I retired, but I look back. And I think also because I did come out of the classroom, and my last 12 years were spent, working with teachers more, working with small groups, working on testing, working on curriculum. It was different.
Were you ever involved with the Brentwood Teachers Association?
No, that I never did.
All right. Did the Brentwood Teachers Association ever come to your assistance in any way over the years that you were there?
Yes, different things would happen. Yes.
Can you think of one thing that happened you can mention to us?
Yeah, and one that actually, it's funny when you said anything that, I was very involved in the school improvement team, and there was one time when there was an incident where teachers had one position, administration had another position, and yes, the Brentwood Teacher Association got involved with that. So that was one time that I can think of, something involved with the early days of the SIT committees.
Okay. Was besides Joe, who I knew was always very helpful to you, is there anyone else that you could name that was very helpful to you as a mentor or
in my early days of teaching, or
at any point in your teaching, someone who was there for you that? All right, early days.
Well, early days, Mike DeBella sticks out, as my principal. Now, later days, Kevin McNicholas is principal at South, and it was a wonderful way to end my career, was working with Kevin.
You did see a lot of administrators come and go over the years.
Yeah, not that many principals.
Really?
Yeah, for the whole time that I was there, there was only 4 principals.
Oh.
And one of the things I say, and I've said it, one of my regrets is that I only worked for Kevin McNicholas for the last 2.5 years, because that's a nice way to go out. It's a really nice way to go out.
Now, the date of your retirement was when?
The actual date?
The date?
June 25th, June 25th, 2004.
Okay. Is there something that you were able to see accomplished that you are most proud of? Was there one thing that you could point to, or that gave you a sense of accomplishment?
In teaching, you mean? Like one thing?
Or in teaching,
yeah.
Or in your later assignment, in your...
Yeah. Not really any more than, not one thing. Later on, a lot of what I was involved in was with testing and everything, working with teachers. But it's hard to pick out one thing, one major accomplishment.
Your major reason for retiring, I don't know if we talked about it, but yes, you mentioned that there are the difference between your age and Joe's age, and you want to spend more time.
Right.
But you also wanted to go out on top and feeling happy with it.
Right. Not to get to a point where, oh, I can't wait to retire. Right. Yeah, that's exactly the word I would use. I didn't want to experience it, and I never felt that.
Is there anything that you could point to that you might say, I used to love that. That gave me more enjoyment than anything else while I was teaching?
Yes, and that was teaching the honors classes. I loved teaching the honors classes because to see students enjoy learning, and one of my best memories of great feeling was to have a student come up to me and he said, I know what the right answer is, but I don't understand it. And I don't understand why it's the right answer. And that was one of my greatest joys. And then something I just thought of now, I had a student in the early days when we still had tracking. And I had him in a C-track class because we had the honors and the A-track and the C-track. And he got sick. He had mono. And I home taught him. And when I home taught him and working with him one-on-one, and I saw how bright he was. And when he came back to school, I worked with him, and due to scheduling, I couldn't get him into the honors class, but we did independent work. And then I had him actually sitting in Joe's 9th grade math class, and I was teaching 8th grade math at the time. And what the honors class was is you would teach them the 9th grade math to the 8th graders. And so going from a C-track class, this child took the Regents at the end of that year, got 100, went on, was in the honors class the next year, and got 100 again. And that was actually a proud moment for me. And it was like, because I felt that I had a lot to do with it. And probably if this kid didn't go home like that, I don't know if I would have picked it up in the classroom, but working with him one-on-one. So things like that. And those are things that come out.
Favorite year?
I had a group of students that went through that building that was, yes, absolutely. And they were my 4th year teaching. They were students born in 1961. And there was something about that class that that was my favorite group. I have no idea. And everybody loved them. There was something about it. Because then I can tell you, one of the worst classes, that we had, for some reason, you have a group of students where just the whole class is a great class. And then, you have another group where they're just awful and you can't wait for them to leave. And it's funny how it works out.
Yeah.
But that was my favorite group. And then probably my second favorite group was a group of kids, of course, with the team teaching, the kids, because then we had them for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a group of students the third time through that were an exceptional group.
Did you have heroes outside of your parents? Was there a hero in your life when you were a kid?
A hero in my life.
We talk about that.
A lot was my older brother. I would look up to my older brother a lot. But not, part of who I was in growing up was I wanted to catch up to my older brother. He was 3 years ahead of me in school. So a big thing was to try. I went into kindergarten knowing my times tables. And part of why I knew my times tables was because he was learning his times tables. So.
You also mentioned that you remembered the Kennedy assassination.
Yes.
As a student.
Yes, I was in 9th grade. And I was at South Junior High, which is where I spent my career. And at the time, by accident, a lot of times the loudspeaker would come on the air. And then they, from the front office, and then they would quickly shut it off. You would hear the radio or something, and you learn to ignore it because it would come on and it would very quickly go off. So sitting in a classroom and the loudspeaker came on and you could hear the radio. And so at first we weren't paying any attention. And then we realized that that's what it was that Kennedy had been shot.
You were also working in 2001 in September.
Yes. And at the time I was in the math lab. And I was coming back upstairs. I'd been downstairs and I was coming back upstairs. And I remember vividly the 2 guidance counselors in the building running up the stairs to see if they could get to see it on TV in the library, and telling me that an airplane had hit the Twin Towers, and just thinking at the time that it was an accident, and then what became. But everybody remembers. You remember what you were doing on November 22nd, 1963, and we'll all remember forever where we were September 11th.
Speaking of remembering, what do you miss the most about teaching?
About teaching? Right now, the camaraderie, the teachers. People that you worked with every day who, and honestly what happens, and as you leave, you say, oh, we'll keep in touch. And that as time goes on, that you're going to lose, because it happens. When you graduate high school, there are people that you never see, or when you go to college. It's just how it is.
I used to refer to that as my 5-minute relationship, which lasted 30 years.
Exactly. Right.
Sorry about
That's okay. Yeah.
the interruption there.
Right. Yeah. People that you saw you're absolutely right. People you saw every single day for over 30 years who you know.
Carol, what aren't you going to miss, though? What won't you miss?
Getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I won't miss that at all.
Is there anything you would like to have accomplished that you didn't have time to do? Or?
At the time?
Yeah.
Looking back, no. Nothing I can think of. Yeah.
Is there anything you would have done differently?
No, that's what I say. I have no regrets.
No regrets.
When I first came out of the classroom, I was not ready to come out of the classroom. It was an assignment, and I wasn't happy with the assignment. And it took a little while to adjust and to make it something that I was comfortable with. And now looking back, I'm very happy with how it worked out.
If you could wave your magic wand and see 3 things happen in the public school in Brentwood, 3 things.
3 things happen.
3 changes.
Okay.
What would they be?
One would be to pay all of this testing. That would be number one. I think that it's ridiculous how much the students are tested now. 2 would be to go back to a system where they don't all have to take a Regents exam. Not all students are going to college, and it's very, very unfair that the way the focus now is strictly on academics. And 3 would be to bring back some kind of vocational training for these students, because they are not going to go to college. And I feel that it's just so unfair to them, because we're asking them to do things that they just can't do. And then they're coming out, and then what do they do? And those would be the 3 things.
To the young people who are just beginning their careers or have already begun and are into their first or second year, you who are at the other end of 33 years can offer some advice. What would you like to say to those people?
Don't take it personally. If you know you're doing the best you can do, you can't, if there are problems or anything, you can't take it home with you. It's not a personal thing. It's nice to have a relationship with the students, so also you want to respect each other, but they're not your friend.
Mm-hmm. What are we forgetting? Is there anything that we're forgetting that we want to talk about? I don't want to leave anything out.
I know. I'm trying to think. To me, the biggest part of my history is that, that I went through Brentwood, and that I think I spoke about, I thought it was important to mention back in 1954, how there was only the village school. I think I mentioned that. And how I saw all the new schools being built. Oh, and then I also saw, the closing of a lot of schools, and now the expanding again, so that's a big change. How it was such a big district, and then how many schools closed, and now we ran out of room again.
And you've seen the demographics change.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And one of the things I worry about also now, which I didn't mention, and we don't feel it so much in the middle school, but I know at the high school level, and this is something that I hope will be better. Just when you're talking about the 3 things, is the gangs. That's a big problem, and I hope that gets addressed, because that's a scary thing, what's happening now with students. And it's not just Brentwood.
No, it's outside the school district, though.
Right.
The impacts on it.
Yes, that's a big thing. And, so you see changes in the students, because of that, and how they are with each other. And again, we would only see little effects down in the junior high, and I know that's a big part up at the high school.
Carol, as the students that you've had come back for their 10-year reunions and 20-year reunions and 30-year reunions, how do you hope they remember you?
Caring. Somebody that really cared about them. That would be my number 1. Yeah.
Now it's time for me to thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Today.
Okay.